So now we're going to introduce ourselves to using Code Sandbox, which is an awesome editor for React specifically. The reason this is so much better than AWS Educate, in my opinion, is that this automatically re-renders whenever you save. You don't have to worry about caching or anything like that. That being said, I would periodically copy and paste all the code you have into here into AWS Educate, or sorry, Cloud9, and then once you have it in your Cloud9, I would just push it up. That way you have your backups. So pretty much anytime you are feature developing, I would make sure to do that. So right now you can sign in and then you can make a new account. You can sign in with Google or sign in with GitHub, whichever you want. You don't have to do that right now, but I would recommend doing it just so that as soon as you start typing, it saves permanently to your own account. So now that we're at our link, let's get started and start coding some stuff. So the first thing that I'm going to do now is look through our files. So let me go ahead and click, where is it? Let's go ahead and get rid of the sandbox info here. Let's get rid of these dependencies. And we see all of our files here. So the source and the public. I'm going to open up all the directories just to make sure that we don't lose track of anything. Cool. So it looks like we have an index.html, a clock.jsx, and a main.jsx. Cool. Let's read through our code. First of all, it's clearly not working. Every time I press Control S, it pulls up this unexpected token. And it has some to-dos, so I'm guessing that we have to fill in some to-dos. So let's read through this HTML. So there's a bunch of metadata that I don't know too much about. There's like shortcut icons, doesn't really matter. The title is a React app. Cool. It's not really saying anything that we need to worry about here. It says you need to enable JavaScript to run this app. That's not going to be a problem here. And now it's saying down here, this HTML file is a template. If you open it directly in the browser, you will see an empty page. You can add web fonts, etc., etc. To begin development, start this. To create a production bundle, do that. Okay, and all I'm seeing right now is a template where there's one div that says content in it. Cool. Let's go into our main.jsx. That's going to be the next thing that I open up. It says we need to do a to-do call render here. Okay? Not really sure what that means, but we're also importing clock from clock. Okay? Now let's go into clock. So we're importing clock from clock, but this clock.jsx is exporting a class named clock. So I'm assuming that this is the class that's being imported in main.jsx. And this says that we have a super props. We need this as a derived class. If we have a constructor, we need to be initializing something here. Doesn't look like there's a to-do, so maybe we don't have to worry about that right now. My function, this is optional. I think this is just saying that we can define arbitrary functions here to do whatever we want them to do. So let's get started. This is a required function that should say what our desired HTML should look like. So we have a render, and then it says to do, our HTML goes here. So notice that I haven't typed anything at this point, but as soon as I start typing, it's going to refresh the page and it's going to reload everything. It's also going to fork your code for yourself. So the changes that you make aren't going to affect the changes for everyone else. It's not going to affect my file or anything like that. It's forking it so that you have your own copy. So let's return a simple hello world for now. Hello world, and then let's close that header tag. Okay, and then we're saving. Let's see what happens now. It doesn't load anything. Okay, so that to-do message was gone, but it's not loading anything. So maybe that's because in main it said to-do call render here. So let's figure out what it looks like to call to actually render something into our DOM. So like we said, there was something in our DOM that we want to replace. So there was only one element that we had in here, so this content div, and we want to replace the content div with whatever our React is rendering. So the way that we do that in React, and this is a bunch of jargon, but the way that we end up doing this is we basically say we're going to render something. So let's just say to do here. And then we're going to get that element. So first we're going to do document.getElement by ID. And then what was the name of that? It was content. So I'm just going to copy and paste that over to avoid typos. And then close that out. And now this to do is basically just going to be an instance of this class. And the way that we get that instance is a really weird syntax. It's basically something like this. It's like a combination of HTML and JavaScript. So what we're doing is basically getting this value and putting it inside of a tag. And now that we do that, we're going to get whatever we want to display. It looks like I accidentally put some quotes here, so I'm going to take out those quotes and then press save, and as soon as I press save, it automatically renders on the page. So we were able to get a hello world working rather quickly. Now let's figure out how we can do something a little bit more complicated. Let's try to make a ticking clock. Okay, so before we make a ticking clock, let's make a small change. So this constructor has a bunch of squiggly red lines. If I look over this, it says useless constructors. Useless constructor because it's not really doing anything. So let's go ahead and comment everything out. You just press command slash or control slash and it comments all of your selected lines. Cool. So now let's actually change this into a ticking clock. Now the way that we can do this is the following. Let's just go ahead and make a new div here. And then let's close out that div. Now let's make a header that still says hello world. Then let's make a second header, an h2. And then let's actually do something like this. It is to do. And then let's fill in this to do with the ticking clock. So the way that we do that is just like in HTML, in Flask, what we're going to do is do a open close curly brace. And then the thing here is in React, you can put any arbitrary JavaScript inside of this open and close curly brace. So let's go ahead and do something like new date, open and close, oops, not data queue, new date. And then inside of date, let's just go ahead and pick one of these. So we can do toLocale time string, one of these. Let's go ahead and pick toLocale time string. And then this is a function. So let's put those function things. Awesome. So now we actually have a clock, but it's not ticking right now, right? So it's not actually making any changes here. Okay, so right now, the reason that we're seeing it static is render is always a pure function. In React, we call this a pure function because it doesn't take in any values, it doesn't get to do any logic, it just gets to return some pure HTML. And it could be based on state and props, which we'll talk about in lecture 9, but it's not going to do anything fancy inside. It can't do like some JavaScript or anything like that. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to pass this in as a prop. And the way that we're going to do that is let's copy this out of here, or let's cut this out of here, and then replace this with this.props.time. And then let's go into our main function and then pass in a prop. So a prop is like a parameter in this weird language that we have. Like again, we have this HTML tag, but inside of here, we're going to pass in a prop. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to say time equals, and then curly braces, and then put in our JavaScript. And then now if we refresh, it's going to do the same thing. So again, we just have this.props.time inside of here. So we're passing in a prop, which is basically a parameter to this, and it's going to be called time. And then we're actually defining the parameter here inside of our main.jsx. And main.jsx is just going to say time is equal to this value, date.toLocale string. Cool. But now, as you can see, it still doesn't refresh, right? So what we can do is wrap this in an if statement, basically, or wrap this in a interval statement. So what this is going to look like is you can do window.setInterval, and then this is going to do something like some function, and then you specify the interval in milliseconds. But the way that we actually do that is we have to have a function that wraps this. So let's say this is called function render HTML. Now let's come down here and let's move this inside of here. Now we just replace this to do with render HTML. And then once we've been able to do that, let's rearrange it so that we write render HTML and then call it. So now if we refresh, we'll see that it's actually updating once a second. So this is great, this is actually working, and it's making a ticking clock. This is awesome. This is something that we really like, but this is actually incredibly inefficient. And the reason that this is incredibly inefficient is we're basically saying we're going to call this render HTML function every 1,000 milliseconds or every second. And what render HTML is doing is it's saying render the entire React DOM every single time. Every single second, render the entire React DOM. That's what we're going to be talking about in lecture 9. And a spoiler on how we're going to do that is we use something called props here, which is external things. We're basically passing props down to our JavaScript or into our React objects. We're going to use something called state next week. And what state is going to do is figure out how we're going to be able to maintain internal state and use that to change what the display actually is.